And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. So we were just talking about the good angels, and now we're going to be talking about some of the darker side of the spirit world with David Rountree and Robbie Lunt, and we're going to find out, do evil ghosts exist? But this hour of the show is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can begin your journey on opening yourself up to your intuition by downloading our free 50-page guide. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And don't forget, if there's things going on in your life, problems in your relationship, issues in your career, not sure where you're moving forward in life, or even issues with your health, give me a call, drop me a note, stop by my website, soulhealer.com, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. Okay, so let me tell you about this hour's guest. We're going to be talking to David Rountree and Robbie Lunt about their new book, Demon Street. Scared already, and I think they're the ones that are like totally messing with my sound system, so I'm just going to blame them and their little ghosties. Anyway, so let me tell you about the guests, and I will bring them on the air. David Rountree has been researching the paranormal since 1976. He is the executive director of Spirit Lab, a scientific research organization in Hackensack, New Jersey, where he lives. He has become a fixture in the paranormal world. I'm not even going to touch that one. As the authority on technology of ghost hunting with his book, Paranormal Technology. Robbie Lunt is an archaeologist currently residing in Washoe Valley, Nevada. He has been performing energy work in both Tai Chi and Reiki for more than 20 years. Robbie is also a proud member of the Way of Nature Fellowship. And so the authors of Demon Street USA, please welcome to Just Energy Radio, David Rountree and Robbie Lunt. Hey guys, how are you?
Hey Rita.
Hey Rita, it's wonderful to be here.
Well, cool. I've been looking forward to this interview, because I love you, David. So, and with that said, since you've been on the show several times before, and if someone's interested in your history and background and your work in the paranormal field, I do suggest they go to the archives and listen to some of the older shows. But Robbie, you're a newbie on the show, and so I'm going to pick on you first.
Excellent.
So could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what opened you up to the paranormal in the first place?
I've always been kind of interested, and I had several experiences growing up, but what truly kicked my butt on the path was the book that we just got done writing. Everything in the book happened in 1985. So it really set me on an interesting path.
Okay. So, David, why did you and Robbie decide to document this story in Demon Street? Wait, Demon Street. I wish I had sound effects. Demon Street.
Rita, it was the kind of thing that we couldn't write back in 1985 after it occurred because there was no market for it, number one. You didn't talk about this stuff back then, number two. There was no internet. There was no cell phones. There was no computers. It was a different world. We knew that we couldn't write the story then, but we knew that someday we would write the story. And what triggered writing the story was, I guess, we were ready. We had finally reached a point where we had enough wisdom, we had enough experience, we had enough, knowledge of the world and probably the right connections to actually sit down and write the book. And that happened. We started on the project 2 years ago. And once we started on the project, all sorts of things started happening all over again for us.
All right. Well, you'll have to give an update as we move forward with what's going on. So, Robbie, how do you guys know each other? I mean, I know David from different paranormal events, but you're telling me this was in 1985. So, what what actually made a connection between the two of you guys in the first place?
David and I worked on stages together. He was the technical director for the University of Florida's Performing Arts Series, and I was his head electrician. So we spent a lot of hours together and got to know each other really well. Stage crews kind of become a family unit away from your family. Kind of like like your team is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I did a little bit of stage stuff and actually had 3 theater arts tech roommates, and they were never home. They were always, doing stuff.
You never sleep. That's the thing,
Well, it would have been nice if they were home, because that was the year I lived in the former funeral parlor, so I was there by myself a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a hopping place. That's almost like being in a haunted theater, which we spent lots of time in as well. But yeah, I mean, Robbie and I were in show business together. He was a lighting director, a lighting person. I did lighting and sound. I had a nice job at the university where I was in charge of, like Robbie said, all the performing arts events that came there. And we also did concerts at the Student Union building and stuff. So we spent an awful lot of time together. And we worked together I worked freelance at the same production company that Robbie worked at as well. So we did a lot of time together. And how he connected for this was, he was over at my house one night. I was talking to my next door neighbor, and I was in a feud with someone in my neighborhood. And I went inside, and I don't know, let me let Robbie tell it, because he witnessed it, and it probably had a greater impact on him than it did on me. I was just acting normal.
Well,
sorry, oopsie.
Well, you know how it is, Rita.
Well, as normal as it could be, all of a sudden, as we're standing outside, this really intense buzzing started to happen. It overrode all of the cicadas and all of the crickets, and it just kept going bigger and bigger. And Dave kind of fidgeted a little bit. He looked in the distance, and he said, "Hold on a second, I need to take care of something." And he ran into his house and came back, and he had a handful of corn. And he did some passes over it and mumbled, and then he just threw it in the direction he had looked previously with a lot of intent. And I gave an interesting little yell, and I heard this crackle. It was like a crackle and then a pop, and then everything in the around sounded normal again. And Dave kind of wiped his hands, and I remarked to him that I had seen this, and his eyebrow went up, and obviously there was something more to it than I knew at that point. That was, I guess, power pointing me out to Dave.
Yeah, you could say that. That would be a good way to put it. Robbie had, over the years, questioned me a lot about my shamanic background, and he had always wanted to learn more. But it's the kind of thing that you just don't teach somebody unless something points that person out to you to teach it. And it was around this time that these circumstances pointed out to me that Robbie needed to be taught. And so that's kind of how his apprenticeship started. He was my first apprentice. And it was over this event that led up to, of course, the writing of the book.
So can I just interject something just very weird?
Sure. You normally do.
Well, yeah, but... Okay, so in the chat room, they're making these comments, and they made this comment that they can't hear the cicadas anymore because since I've moved, the cicadas have been overwhelmingly loud with the windows closed in my no air-conditioned office with barely a fan on, okay? So it's a little hot, but still loud. And so then Robbie starts talking about there's no cicadas and no crickets. Right after I post, well, they just stopped. So does that mean they're going to start again here in a little while? And are you the cause for them to stop?
Nothing would surprise me at this point.
Okay, that was my little interjection.
That's okay. That's not weird, actually. That fits right in with the whole theme of tonight's show. So we'll just keep on trucking.
Okay. Okay, so how did this whole thing begin? I mean, so you guys met, decided that you were going to take Robbie on as an apprentice, but see, I didn't even know that you had like this whole spiritual background, David.
Nobody did, Rita. I mean, this is not something that I shared with the public. The only inkling that I ever had was in my bio. I made mention of an event that occurred in 1985 that made me leave the spirituality approach to the paranormal, and this was the event that did that. I knew that when I revealed this, it would probably surprise a lot of people, but back in 1976, prior to starting down the scientific path, I actually spent a summer where I was sort of apprenticed to a Native American medicine man who sort of tricked me into learning the ways of at the time, coyote medicine. And that was what I was practicing at the time. The events that we went through, and I'll get to that later, but I no longer practice coyote medicine. I practice wolf medicine today, and that's a story in itself that'll probably be told in the sequel.
Okay, well, it's just, it was a little bit surprising for me to hear that. So,
As to many people, it's part of being a medicine man is to have a certain amount of mystery in your life anyway. And it's not something that normally a person advertises. I mean, there's a lot of people advertising it out there, but it's not the sort of thing that you normally advertise. People come to you because they're brought to you by the spirit, or they're brought to you by, power, or something directs them to you. You don't, have a business card that says, "Hi, I'm Dave Rountree, medicine man." It doesn't work that way. Not in reality.
well, it could, but
It could, but it's a more sacred path than that.
no, I hear what you're saying. So when did all the spooky stuff start? What's the story around that? Come on, we want the juice.
Well, Robbie, why don't you pick up, because you got the story firsthand and delivered it to me. So,
Well, absolutely. We were hanging out, waiting for darkness to fall, and one of the people I worked with, his wife was with us, and when everyone walked away, she started telling me this story about a big eye that would appear in her field of vision every night as she was falling asleep, and then it would pull her out of her body, and this old guy with a beard would show up, and he'd walk her around and show her all the ghosts that existed on this particular piece of property she lived on. And she said it was happening every night. And, I said, well, why don't you move out? But her husband would have nothing to do with it. He thought she was kind of wacky. So that was all good. It left. We went back to work. And then about 2.5 months later, I saw her again. And she had drastically changed. Her husband had left the country and had gone overseas and was out of contact, and whatever was at her house knew that she was alone and had really ramped up all the activity. She said she had a balcony where there was parties constantly. Every time she would look out on the porch, she would see these shadows, day and night, just constantly going on, always hearing noise. But then the one that really got her, when she couldn't take that any longer, she spent the night at her landlord's, which was also on the same property. And in the middle of the night, she woke up to a loud sound and saw a stove dancing in the kitchen. That didn't do her. What really got her was the wave that went through the floor, picked her up, and dropped her back down on the ground. That one sent her out to the middle of the night. So here I get presented with all this. My first thought is, hey, let's grab Dave and go see a haunted house. This is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, that'll teach me. I think when I got you, it was really a lark, wasn't it, Dave?
yeah, lark is kind of a funny way of putting it. We thought it was going to be a lot of fun, and we didn't even take any equipment or anything. We just wanted to go see this place, perform. And, we kind of got a surprise that we weren't expecting when we got there.
Okay, so before you tell the surprise, when you heard this story, Robbie, what was your thought about it? Did you think it was just kind of weird and bizarre? I mean, you hear these stories from people, and sometimes, your rational brain goes, "Yeah, right." Or did you get the feeling that there was actually something going on, and a level of truth to it?
It's interesting. First of all, the rational mind bit has never been a problem for me. Um, so, and at that point in time, you had there were the things by Hans Holzer. There were books by Hans Holzer. There were books by Rod Steiger. There were a couple of magazines out. Man, Myth, and Magic for a while was a magazine that was out that talked about the spiritual and the paranormal, but there really wasn't a lot. And I had read every single thing, either fiction or nonfiction at that point, that was written on it. So the chance to go and visit this haunted house, I mean, wow, that's going to be a ton of fun. And also, quite honestly, at the time, I lived in a haunted house. But those were nice ghosts.
Okay, well, there are nice ghosts. I'll agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you were already open to the whole idea that there were ghosts. Well, I just am thinking about the giant eyeball thing, and I just keep thinking of, the Two Towers, Lord of the Ring, or, Return of the King with just a giant eyeball.
And, it's so horrible because that's all I picture in my mind. So,
okay, so it's
Peter
not
Jackson.
just me.
No, not at all. When I see when I get the picture of how she described it, it was just, that was spot on. And then the movie became so successful, I didn't really want to get too trendy by using that as the example. But that's really the whole idea I got. I knew right away when she described that in the way she did that it was really bad. I told her to move out, but again, her husband would have nothing to it. I bet you've even noticed that it's always that one person has experienced something in these situations and the other person is almost left alone so they can, be the doubter and keep the people locked into the situation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay, so she tells you all this stuff, and you guys go to the house to kind of like check it out. Then what?
When we walked across the property, there was a water-filled ditch that went completely around the property. And the minute you crossed that ditch, for me it was like a huge gorilla just jumped onto my back. How is it you describe it, Dave?
Yeah, like a grand piano was dropped on my back and I was carrying it around. It was pretty incredible. I mean, the air was so thick and oppressive, you could literally cut it with a knife. It was like just this weight on your whole body. There was like, you felt depression, the emotional feelings that went through your body were just tremendous. And that was my first inkling that we weren't really dealing with a ghost, that we were dealing with something a little more heinous would probably be a good word to say.
There were ghosts there.
Yeah, there were. They were actually nice.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Comparatively speaking, they were actually fairly well behaved, except for the one in the closet, Robbie, that caused you to sort of teleport between, me and Clevis, which I'm still not quite sure how you did that night.
I'm not either. It was very bizarre. There was a closet in the landlord's room that always stayed open. They could never keep it closed. They'd pile stuff in front of it, and it would always open. And as he and Dave were having a wonderful, deep philosophical discussion, I really wanted to check that something was bugging me. Go check that closet out. And I couldn't walk through the hallway to even get into the bedroom. So when I grabbed them and we all went into that room, as Dave said, coyote medicine is not pleasant to the person who's on the receiving end of the teachings. We'll just put it that way. So here's this door that never stays, it is never closed, and we walk in, and the first thing the landlord goes is, wow, that's strange. That door's closed. And my good friend Dave taps me in the back and he goes, hey, go open it up. And yeah, I did. And he's right. To this day, I don't even know. It's that old Maxell commercial where the guy's sitting in the chair and the speaker's just blowing everything back. That's what it felt like when I opened the door. And then the next thing I knew, I was standing behind the two of them, not wanting to get anywhere near that closet. It was, yeah, I guess it would be teleportation of some kind, but I was not going to be there that much longer. I can tell you that.
No, and it was a puff of smoke where you had been standing at the closet door, and suddenly you were behind us. I'm still to this day not sure how that happened, but it was entertaining.
To finish it off, though, I mean, you had poor Penelope. She's with us. She's the woman who's having the trouble. And she looks up into that closet, up into the top shelf, and starts screaming, slams the door shut, and goes running out. And when we asked her what she saw, she said she saw two little red eyes on the top shelf just staring at her. So that's usually another sign. Ghosts tend to not have the staring red eyes.
So at this point in time, you guys are starting to come to the belief that you have more than your typical active haunting going on here?
Yeah, by that time we were pretty well convinced. I mean, there was one point where Clevis's girlfriend was possessed right before our eyes. That was a real eye opener because I never knew that a human being could grin that big of a grin. She literally had a grin that went from ear to ear. That was a little disturbing. And his comment on it was, "Oh, they do that to her all the time," which was a bit more disturbing. But this guy had an incredible library. In his den, I mean, this guy was just a pork pie redneck, needed a stepladder to get into his pickup, the whole 9 yards. And he has this library that has like these old leather-bound books, and they have titles on them with grimoire names that are theoretical or legendary that no one knows exists. And here I'm looking at copies of them on a shelf, and these books are written in not English. They're handwritten in like Greek and Latin and all these old languages. And he had cuneiform tablets. He had scrolls. He had papyrus Egyptian writing.
So where did he
articles.
get all that stuff? And could he read it? I mean, what's this guy? How does he fit into this whole thing?
Well, now that's an interesting story. His grandfather at one time owned a good part of Levy County. And in fact, the area that he owned back in, I believe, in the late 30s, there was a town there a town of black folks that was entirely wiped out. And it was based on a reported rape that did not occur by the person that the person said it occurred by. And they actually made a movie about it called Rosewood. But he owned that property, and that town disappeared, and he was behind that. He had a lot to do with that. But Robbie did a great deal of research. And again, back then, we did not have the internet. We didn't have Google. Research was done the good old-fashioned way by going to the local towns, looking up, the local history, going to the library, going to the Hall of Records, going to the courthouse. And he wasn't mentioned in any local history. And yet he owned at one point about 2/3 of the entire county. So this is pretty crazy that we have this very affluent person who isn't mentioned in local history at all. It's like Robbie says, we have this tradition in the South that if you ignore something, it goes away. And that's kind of what they were doing with this guy. And that was his grandfather which we found out later was also his father, because his grandfather raped his mother, and that's how he was conceived. And it gets even way more twisted than that. But the property in Gainesville was owned by his grandfather, and we're pretty sure that the books and the library that he had there was his grandfather's before it was his.
Well, and also, you know, you have the University of Florida there, and Gainesville is a very spiritual area. There's all kinds of interesting things in that area. So people get interested in stuff and they just throw it away. And I think between his grandfather and the fact of where we lived, he was able to acquire quite a library. And I think he at least attempted to use it too. That was the bad thing.
Yeah, that you know, there were books there that were supposed to be works of fiction that didn't exist, and yet we found a very ancient copy of one.
Okay, so how does he fit in the whole Penelope house thing?
You know, it was very interesting. After we visited the house when he was there the first time, towards the end of the evening after Penelope had left, and it was just David Clevis and I, he walked up to me, and I swear to you, he knew where he was standing in that yard. But he looked up, and there was a strip of light right across his eyes, in just his eyes. I swear he knew where he was standing. It wasn't any magic or anything like that. Damn it. But he sat there, and he looked at me, and he put a hand up, and he said, "Here, grab my hand." And I did, and I felt something come out of it and start up my arm, and then I stopped it. And he got all upset because I didn't see him go through these interesting physical changes. But then he looked at me and he said, "I can conjure demons. Can you?" And my response was, I don't want to conjure demons. But he did ask me again. It's not what I said. "Can you conjure demons?" "I can." Basically, these things were his protectors, his companions.
Great.
I think he was.
Did he do it with like a real southern twang too?
Oh yeah.
I can conjure demons.
Yep.
Exactly.
Wait. I could do it perfect.
Okay,
Can you conjure demons? I can.
Yeah, I mean, it was the juxtaposition of this just redneck, and what he was saying was
mind blowing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were in shock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, my question is, were they smart demons or dumb demons? You know?
No, it was way smarter than he was, let me tell you. And the thing is that he made some kind of a deal, and we're not sure what that was, but he had some kind of deal going on with what was there. And, you know, if you read the book, if you get into the book, we sort of lay out things as they occur and how we learned them. See, we learned these things a little bit at a time over a period of 3 months. I mean, we had someone ask us last night, you know, when we went back after our first visit, what was our plan of attack? What was our strategy? And it's like we had none. We had never encountered anything like this before in our life. So we were winging it, you know. We were trying to let power point out to us, you know, which way to go. And the remarkable thing about that is that power helped us. I mean, people came to us and gave us things that we would need and told us information that we needed. And it was incredible because we had no idea what to do. And it sort of just unfolded on its own as time went on.
There was one point I looked in the newspaper after the last time we actually were allowed to go to the property, and our heads were spinning. And as I'm flipping through the newspaper, there was a psychic fair, and it's real interesting because we all decided as a group to go to the psychic fair, and our neighbor Doug went with us too. And when we walked through the door, there was a gentleman sitting right at the door, and he just looked straight down at his hands and would not make eye contact with us for anything. However, it was like a beautiful Bob Fosse choreographed moment. Every single psychic in that room when we walked in the door all spun around. They looked at us, and then they continued with what they were doing. But it was just every one of them at the same time. It was mind-blowing. In fact, I talked to our friend Doug just the other day, and he said he remembers walking through the door with us, watching all of those psychics turn and look at us, and his words were, "Oh, screw this," and he went and he sat outside while we went in and did our thing. So, and,
Yeah.
the other thing about this is that everywhere we went, everything we did, it wasn't just Dave and I. There was always somebody else. There was always a third or fourth party that was witness to all of these things, and we were doing the same thing. So it really, we know it was more than just our overactive imagination.
Yeah. And one thing good about that psychic fair we went to, there was this wonderful little psychic, a little redhead woman named Ruth Davenport. You see, Robbie, I remembered her name finally. Ruth, we had decided that one of us would go in and get a reading. And I believe Penelope did the first reading. And she went in for a 15-minute reading or something like that and came out like 45 minutes later. And then I went in for like a 5-minute reading or something like that. And I was in there for a good 20 minutes. And she says to me, "I've got to give y'all something." And she goes out and she's reaching in her pockets as she's walking out to the parking lot with me. And she pulls out a small quartz crystal. And it was a pretty crystal and it was nice. But she looked at it and she looked at me and then Robbie was there and she said, "No," she says, this isn't going to do. She says, "I need to get y'all the big gun." And so she opens her trunk and and her trunk is like our trunk, Rita, when we go to a show. Mm-hmm. It's piled with all sorts of stuff in it.
Crap, yeah.
Yeah. And so she's ransacking her trunk. And all of a sudden she squeals a little bit and she pulls her finger back and she goes, "Oh my God, it cut me." And she has a huge gash on her finger where the crystal literally cut her when she went to pick it up. And she goes, "I can't believe they don't want me to give you this." And she gave us this really nice crystal. And then, of course, she told us that we had to purify it and how to purify it and all that. And then she gave us a prayer that we ended up using as part of the process of getting rid of this. So, I mean, she was like a ray of light in the middle of darkness because we had no clue even why we were there. So she really gave us our first big, I think, boost in the right direction.
The part I find the most interesting in this whole thing, David, is the words that are coming out of your mouth, because I always have seen you as this very scientific.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to say skeptic because I don't really see you as, a hardcore skeptic, but there definitely is always this, I want to see the evidence and blah, blah,
right.
blah. And
it's blowing your mind, I know, and I apologize for that.
Well, no, it's refreshing.
But you have to understand, I walk two paths. I walk a path that I know, and I walk a path that I have to prove for others to know it's real. Because I believe that it's important to tie the metaphysical and the physical together. And the only way we're going to do that and be taken seriously is through science. So my science hat makes me be this objective scientist, but my spiritual hat knows all this stuff is real. And that's the edge I have in trying to design things in order to demonstrate that these things are real. So it helps me with my scientific research. And, because once you experience something, I have kind of an analytical mind. So I document in my mind what I'm going through. And then I try to figure out a way to quantify that later scientifically. But both paths work really well together, and I've managed to keep them tightly entwined now for some time. But yes, you can't publicly go out and say that you're a spiritualist and then say you're a scientist in the same line because people don't take you seriously. Well, now that I've established myself as that scientist, I feel a little more comfortable about revealing this part of my past. And it's something that I still do today. So, yeah, I know it's blowing your mind. And sometime now that we'll have to have a conversation about it.
Okay, well, come on. I thought you knew that I was like cool and everything, but I don't know. I'm gonna have to talk about you bad. But anyway, um,
Everybody else is right now, so join the bandwagon.
yeah, I don't talk to anybody anyway. So how would you I mean, so are you characterizing what was going on, what was in this house as being a demon versus a ghost? And if that's the case, how would you characterize the difference between one and the other?
Well, that's a very good question, but if you've ever come face to face with a demonic entity, the difference is actually startling. Your whole body reacts to it. Your body is revulsed, and repulsed, and you're sick. All you want to do is your fear impulse goes into overdrive, and you want to beat feed it out of there as fast as you can, but you're frozen solid in place by pure fear. So it is a overwhelming sensation or group of sensations that you experience, and once you experience it, it's like nothing else you've ever experienced. Nothing comes even close. I've been exposed to very active houses that have disembodied consciousnesses in them, or what we call ghosts, and it's nothing like what we experienced. Nothing. And once you ever experience it, you don't never want to experience it again, ever. It's that kind of thing. And it destroyed a lot of people's lives that were around us that came into contact with it. It did a great deal of harm to my life. I spent 17 years living a fairly miserable life afterwards. So it's not difficult to tell once you felt it, because it's a unique situation that is not readily walked into again. And yet we went back 2 more times after the initial encounter.
Well, of course. Okay, so there's this demonic entity. You meet it for the first time in this house. But when you think of a ghost, okay, and I'm just going to kind of go from this angle. When you think of a ghost, you think of it as being kind of attached to a location, unless you have like your basic attached entity, which is more attached to a person.
Right.
So with this thing, it sounds like it wasn't really attached to anybody or anything, was just kind of free-floating, acting out against anything that it came in contact with.
Yeah, it didn't have any boundaries. That was something we noticed when it appeared at Robbie's house. It was actually in his Florida room. And I got a phone call from him, and he was somewhat in control, but also somewhat in a panic. But he was controlling it really well. But he was saying that it was in his house. What should he do? And I'm going to turn it over to him to tell that story.
It's very kind of him to actually say that I was in control. I don't know that I was in control. I mean, it was the middle of the day. It was like 2 PM on a bright, Florida day. The sun was out, and the Florida room is one of those rooms that has 3 sides that they're all windows. And I look over because Penelope was there, and she started to really freak out, and I looked where she was looking. And at this point in time, this thing was appearing to me as, for lack of better term, as a hellhound. Just this huge black dog that, when you look at shark's eyes, they're a flat black. It wasn't even that. There was a depth to the blackness. It was just really mind-blowing, especially when it's just sitting there in the Florida room looking at you and panting. I called Dave in an absolute panic. And he reminded me that he had given me some corn, and so I found 13 kernels of that corn, and I brought it back.
Wait. The plumpest, juiciest kernels. I'll never forget that description.
Absolutely. It was the plumpest, juiciest, bestest kernels I could absolutely find. And I filled them with as much light as I could, and I threw them at the damn thing sitting there, and there was this loud howl, and it ran out through the walls. And at that point, Penelope and I, we went out through the walls too. We just ran out the back door, had to sit out in the sunshine. And when Dave showed up, we went back in and we looked for the kernels of corn, and there was really only just these spots of ectoplasm laying around on the ground. And we did find 2 kernels of corn, but they weren't plumpus anymore. They were all shriveled up and mummified. It was pretty freaky. After that, that really let us know how serious this was going to be. I think when we first encountered this thing, it was still kind of fresh, new, and was still building strength. And by the time it came by the house, it definitely had its strength up.
Yeah,
and was trying to get in.
It was full blown fire to the wall there when it came up. And the thing about it was, when I got there, both of them were white as a sheet. I mean, Robbie had no color whatsoever. And Robbie's sort of pale to start with, but he had zero color. He was absolutely white. And Penelope was too. And she was actually shaking. So I knew whatever they had encountered had been bad. And, and after that, it only went downhill from there.
Well, I tell you, though, we had, again, the wonderful confirmation. My wife was at work. My girlfriend, actually, at the time was at work. And her boss drove her home. And I knew her boss was a psychic, so I actually kept my mouth shut and waited for her. And the minute she opened the door of her car, she had to grab the frame of the car to hold herself up. And she came across the yard, and she took one step up the back steps and then just started backpedaling. I had to come out and tell her that it was gone, because there was still so much energetic residue that it freaked her out. And she had, for a moment, was really concerned until she realized that we actually had a semi-clue. We knew we were messing with something really nasty. We might not have had a clue, but we knew it was bad.
Yeah, that's a way of putting it.
You think?
Yeah. Yeah. The best part, I think the best part, though, I mean, there were funny moments. And I'll tell you right now, Rita, what saved us through this whole process was our sense of humor. Because we would literally laugh ourselves safe. I don't know if that makes any sense. But we would, I mean, there was a time, part of Robbie's training was I had to take him different places of power around Gainesville and expose him to power so he could gather it, so he could absorb this power. And one of the places I took him was to this old graveyard over towards Micanopy. And it's very famous for having a governor buried there, Madison Stark Perry, and that's the largest tomb on the whole old ancient graveyard is there. And when we got there, I had a tombstone I wanted to show him. It was all the way at the back of the graveyard. And so Robbie, why don't you give us the tour de force here on that?
Well, it was an interesting graveyard because it dropped in elevation heading back towards a bog. So as you got deeper down in, you got to the old oak trees that were so overgrown that no light really got through there. So it was pretty dim. And we went way back into the back, and Dave points to this tombstone that's there. It's a little different. It's a little set off. It's different from all the others. And when I looked at the face of it, it was a poured concrete stone that somebody had actually looked like they took a stick. And on it they wrote, "Not dead." That was all it said. Not dead. And again with that wonderful... sometimes I wonder about myself. We were talking about rationality earlier. My dear friend Dave said, "Touch it." And of course, I did. And I pulled off a 3-foot bright white blue arc that felt like I had just grabbed a huge electrical main. And I screamed and I turned around and I wanted Dave's opinion, and he was nowhere to be seen. I really freaked out until I realized he's lying on the ground, bent over, tears running down his face, laughing so hard.
Yeah, that was Robbie's first kind of full-fledged date with power. But we went a lot of different places around Gainesville. We went out on Payne's Prairie. We went to the Devil's Mill Hopper, which is a geological site, and in preparing Robbie to get him up to speed to do battle. And so there was a lot of very funny moments in his training. And we tried to portray that as accurately as possible. We had to cut 10,000 words from the manuscript. So we lost a lot of really precious dialogue. But the meat of it comes through.
All right, so we're kind of getting a little close on time. So let me ask you this question. So did you finally get rid of this thing? Send it off to its next adventure?
Well, we're still alive.
Well, I mean, you're alive, and it's not bothering you anymore. But did you get it to, I'll use the little phrase, did you get it to go into the light? Or
no.
somewhere else? Or, I don't even really...
We did get it to go somewhere else. The thing about these things is you can't kill them, and you can banish them, but it's not permanent because someone can just conjure them right back again. There are ways to bind them. We did not know at the time those ways because we, as I said, were dealing with it for the first time. So we ended up coming up with a sort of mix, a hodgepodge of different things to deal with it because Christian banishments didn't work at all. Mm-hmm. The only thing that we had Christian in our banishment was we had holy water that was blessed by a Roman Catholic priest. But everything else in what we did was a mixture of all sorts of different cultures thrown together. It was almost like we had to go way back before Christianity or even the Jewish race even existed as a people to get what we needed to get rid of this.
And so how many different attempts? There are a lot of people who have, and I'm just going to go with like issues with ghosts or issues with entity attachment. And obviously we were talking about something definitely beyond that. But
a bit, yeah, slightly.
And so, but I just want people to just kind of hear this come from your mouth. How long did it take you? How many attempts did it take before you actually noticed some kind of results?
Well, we tried to do it on several occasions, but circumstances prevented us. We either had a bad reading at the time. Robbie was throwing tarot cards to see what the condition was that we were in, and then other things would happen, and it would prevent us. And we finally did it on Halloween night in 1985. And it was funny, not a single trick-or-treater knocked at my door that night. They went to every house in the neighborhood but mine. I'm not real sure what that means, but no one knocked on our door that night. But we did the ritual, and we knew instantly at the completion of it that we had been effective, and literally piled into the car and piled into my van. I had the Mr. T van back then. I had this black van with the spoiler on it and the lake pipes and the big supercharged V8 in it, and it was the Mr. T van. I mean, that's what Robbie called it. We all piled into the Mr. T van, and we got over there in about 5 minutes because I didn't know any speed but foot on the floor with it. And it was amazing what the house looked like. It was as if every fleck of paint had been blown off of it. It was literally denuded of paint, and all the flecks were on the ground like snowflakes all around it. And not just his house, but all 3 of the houses on the property were the same way. And we didn't stop. We just kind of cruised past, went, oh, wow, and kept on going. So the effect was immediate. So what we did was actually very, very successful. However, it was too successful because we found out later that something was caught in the crossfire, and we'll probably be writing about that in the next book.
Ooh, so there's like a cliffhanger and everything.
There's at least 4 more books in this series.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this book is kind of like childhood. No one gets through it unscarred.
That's true. That's true. A lot of people were changed forever. We had one student that it literally passed through him to get to Robbie, and they were like 60 foot or so up in the air on a little catwalk, and Robbie was like standing out on a pipe almost over the stage adjusting lights, and this thing went through this student to get to Robbie and actually pushed Robbie, almost pushed him to his death. And that guy quit school, dropped out of college, never went back, and Robbie ran into his older brother a few years later, and he had never gotten over that experience.
Wow.
So it touched a lot of people around us as well.
Well, I want to keep going, but our time is up, so we have to stop.
I'm sorry. We're pretty much a 2-hour gig.
You didn't tell me that up front, or I don't know. Anyway,
well, I kind of like to surprise you.
I only had like a couple of slots left, which is why I only got 1 hour. So,
but that's okay. That's okay. It's always a pleasure to be on your show, Rita.
Well, it's always a pleasure hanging out with you, David, and nice meeting you, Robbie. But
it was a ton of fun, Doc. I appreciate it.
But we need to go because I'm sure the music is playing, and then I'll start talking over myself, and that's always ugly. So, good night, gentlemen, and I will talk to you both soon, I'm sure.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. That's David Rountree and Robbie Lunt. Their book is Demon Street, USA, the true story of a very haunted house. Available on Amazon.com and at your local bookstore. And then next week, or you can go to the Just Energy page and purchase it off of that webpage. Next week, we have Jonathan Gray talking about secret history and ancient technology. And so until then, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to